Welcome back. Today I thought I'd take on the not so little task of ranking my top 100 favorite albums of all time. In the past I already did, I think, a top 50 favorite 70s, top 50 favorite 90s albums videos on my channel. I also did my top 10 favorite 80s albums in a video. I don't know why this was a top 10 and not a top 50, a bit inconsistent. And I already thought about doing my top 50 60s albums. I already, selected my top 50, but today I thought I'm more in the mood to do my top 100 of all time albums list. And of course, things like that, it's not really like this is mathematically correct or perfect analytical AI sort of stuff. So an album that maybe is higher in my top 60s, my top 40 favorite 60s albums video or 70s video or 90s video. These positions can change, so it maybe doesn't really, if you're a computer, if you're a robot, it probably doesn't make sense all the time, but this is just like how the top 100 albums came out today. I was in the mood to for the first time in my life rank my top 100 favorite albums, and this is how it came out today. Before I start the honorable mentions, I will not have live albums and compilations and things like that, of course, in this list. It's about studio albums, but if we're talking about compilations, Saturday Night Fever, the soundtrack to Saturday Night Fever would be in there. This is probably my favorite of those not really studio albums. Really love that soundtrack. And studio albums, honorable mentions, I'll make it quick. Lana Del Rey, Born to Die. Really, this is probably my favorite album from that decade. I think it came out in 2012 or 2013 or something like that. Maybe 2011. But this decade, it's my favorite album from that decade, whatever the name of that decade is. Then Brigitte Bardot, it's really hard to pick a single album by her. She first and foremost she was an actress and not a musician or singer, and secondly, most of her albums were like compilations of singles and so on. But there's this one, let's call it an album, called Bébé, BB. That would be my favorite. That's really, even if it's a compilation, it really has a nice flow. The songs are from the same period, so mid-60s, great French beats chanson album. Then the Radha Krishna Tempo, by the Radha Krishna Tempo, but aka George Harrison. It was produced by George Harrison, who also plays instruments and sings in the background. Those are spiritual songs that the people from the Hare Krishna movement in 1969 recorded at the Apple Studios in London with George Harrison. That's my favorite spiritual album in a way. Then two albums where I think the recency bias is what's preventing them to get into the top 100. I think things like that have to settle in, and I wouldn't feel comfortable to put an album from 2025, or in this case two albums from 2025 in such a, the top 100 list. But my two favorite albums from this year so far are Rainy Sunday Afternoon by Divine Comedy and Who is the Sky by David Byrne. In the mood that I'm in now at this moment or in this month, both would probably make my top 100 favorite albums of all time, but ask me again in 1 year, probably I still would love those albums, but maybe not for the top 100. So now the top 100, and we start with my only Jethro Tull album in this list. So this is the moment for the Jethro Tull fans now. Murdoch, for example. Songs from the Wood. They're more folky, bucolic album. I mean, they did several. They had this phase in the mid-70s where they had a couple of albums in that style, Heavy Horses also, but that's probably even a bit more in the hard rock direction also. But this is really this, this rural Englishness thing that Jethro Tull, I think Jethro Tull for me work the best when they have this rural Englishness thing going, combined with their prog rock aesthetic. And Song from the Wood, my favorite Jethro Tull album. 99, Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. 2 days ago I watched the what's it called, Deliver Me From Nowhere, the movie, the biopic, at the cinema. A movie which is also about the process of writing and recording Born in the USA, but first and foremost is about the process behind Nebraska, the album before that, but it also shows you sessions for the what would become the Born in the USA album, Springsteen's by far most successful album ever. I think some Springsteen fans don't really like it as much as many other of his albums, especially the 70s albums. It's a bit like with Let's Dance and David Bowie fans, that it's maybe considered too pop, too mainstream, but I think this is pop songwriting to perfection, especially for that time, mid-80s pop in its perfection, still with this raw rock energy of the Boss and the E Street Band. But this is really the pop moment of Bruce Springsteen, and I love this album. I think this is one of the albums where I like every song, even the so-called fillers. There's not a song that I would skip in this album. There's not a song I would skip in this album. Number 98, The Beach Boys, and it's Captain Obvious, it's Pet Sounds, it's the album most Beach Boys fans, or not even Beach Boys fans, maybe not so much, but more casual Beach Boys listeners would think as their big masterpiece or their only masterpiece. You will see it's not my favorite Beach Boys album. You won't see it in this installment of this series, because I think I haven't mentioned it yet, but this will be a 10-part series. I'm not going to do all 100 albums in one go. The video would be like 2 hours long if I would do that. This is just about number 100 to number 91. In this installment, it's the only Beach Boys album, but there will be at least one more Beach Boys album later on. So it's not my favorite, but of course it's a classic. It's really, even if I'm not emotionally as attached to this album than different Beach Boys album, this is really the most cohesive album. This is really, as an album, this is the best in that sense, in the way that it's arranged and composed as one statement, as one piece of art. The worst thing about this album is probably the album cover, although I like those animals, I like to look at animals, but the picture doesn't tell you anything about the musical content inside, so this is really not really fitting with the music. It's still a classic, and I can see why it's a classic. 97 is more of a modern classic, and it's debatable, is it even a classic? At the time this was probably the most hyped band, at least in the indie sphere, the most hyped rock and roll group. 2001, The Strokes' Is This It?, the start of the so-called dab bands, which was a very short-lived, more hyped than anything else. Most of those bands really were kind of forgettable in hindsight, but this album I think still stands out as an album that really tells you what indie rock in 2001, the best sort of indie rock in 2001, because there was also things like new metal and so on, but the good stuff, that was this was it, so to speak. The Strokes, again, an album without any fillers. If you don't like the Strokes, you might also say an album without any highlights, because it's the same sound. You have to like the sound. It's the same sound from track 1 to track 11. It's like each song is very similar. The songs are very similar to each other. It's one sound, but I like the sound, and so therefore I like all 11 songs, and I also like the shortness, that it's like in the old days, I don't know, a 35 minute album. I think it's still a great album. In my opinion, maybe the last real iconic rock and roll album, the last classic of a real guitar band rock and roll album we'll ever have. Next one is number 95, my favorite Talking Heads album, Little Creatures. Most fans and critics prefer other albums by the group. Again, like with the Bruce Springsteen thing, this is considered, their pop album. It's probably the most mainstream kind of album. I never could get into Remain in Light, which many think of as the best album. That's probably one of my one or two least favorite Talking Heads albums. And I'm also unconventional that my second favorite Talking Heads album is the album after that, True Stories, which isn't really considered that good. But this phase, mid to late 80s Talking Heads is my favorite Talking Heads phase, I have to say. It's it's really a fun album, and in this phase, Talking Heads were really a great fun band, and a thinking man's fun band, I would say. Next up, 95 is not about thinking, but more about feeling. And about feeling sad in a way, or melancholic, feeling melancholic. I only have it on CD. It's Disintegration by The Cure, my favorite Cure album. This is the pinnacle, in my opinion, of what The Cure or what Robert Smith could achieve. It has the poppiness of the mid-80s that culminated in Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, the album before this album. Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is also a masterpiece, in my opinion, but Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is maybe too one-dimensional, although it's a big double album, but it's maybe too one-dimensional in the sense that it only shows you the happy, the glossy, the poppy side of The Cure. At least it shows it more than this album. And this album, keeps the great hook line, great melodies and so on, but also brings it back to those melodramatic, gothic, dark roots of earlier albums such as Pornography, but with the pop sensibilities of the mid-80s Cure. And again, very concise masterpiece of an album, Disintegration. Number 94 is Ariel by Kate Bush, and I show you 93 also. It's 50 Words for Snow. That was also a thing in my Kate Bush album ranking video, that it's really hard to decide for me which I prefer, because they are two sides of of a coin, so to speak. And this is more like the spring and summer album, and this is more the autumn and especially winter album. Now it's autumn here in Vienna. If I would make this video in summer or spring, I think I would prefer Ariel, but since we are in November now, it's 50 Words for Snow. But they're about, in terms of quality or in terms of how much I enjoy them, it's about the same for me. But yeah, this is probably one of the best spring albums in my opinion, and this is maybe the best concept album about winter ever made, and two fantastic Kate Bush albums. Really, when people talk about Kate Bush being this genius artist, those two albums are amongst others proof of that, to make such concise albums about a subject, a season, and delivering. Number 92 is maybe the only hip-hop-ish album in the complete series, although I think number 91 also qualifies as at least semi-hip-hop album. This is Hello Nasty by the Beastie Boys. This is my number 92, and 91, because I just mentioned it, is Odelay by Beck. This is more like a collage of several kind of styles, but hip-hop is very prominently one of those styles. Both albums, are typically 90s. This is what I associate with a 90s sound, because a 90s sound, in my opinion, is not having a particular sound, but collaging and mixing and sampling all sorts of influences and styles into one thing. Those are also the songs, if you can call it's more tracks than songs. Those tracks on those albums are collages or pastiches, but they're both of this sample aesthetic of the 90s. Those are two of my all-time favorites. Again, we've had it with another album, I think with the Talking Heads album before. Those are really fun albums. My all-time favorite albums often tend to be fun albums. This was number 92-91, so this was part 1 of this series, my top 100 favorite albums of all time, and we'll go on next time. I don't know if it will be next week, or maybe this series will be a bit more irregular, like every now and then I'll do a video, and maybe in 2 years we're at number 1. But yeah, that's how it goes. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.